You've heard of high net worth, but we're talking about high net purpose. We want to find out how entrepreneurs, global leaders in our network are allocating financial, human, and intellectual capital in pursuit of purpose. But more importantly, we want to understand the compromises, the paradoxes in their approaches, pitch decks, and philosophies.
Welcome back to High Net Purpose. We have an extraordinary guest joining us from Seattle at Island Bridges offices in London. With us today is Diego Piacentini, a global leader in technology and business. In the late 80s, Diego worked at Apple, building the European business for Steve Jobs, and played a critical role in the company's resurgence. In 2000, Diego joined Amazon and worked in the famous S team and built the international consumer business. In 2016, in an audacious move, he joined the Italian government as Commissioner for Digital Transformation. In our conversation, Diego shares insights from his remarkable career, reflecting on lessons and leadership principles from working with Jobs and Bezos. Tune in to hear how balancing personal and professional life, along with trusting your instincts, can drive impactful achievements and inspire a fulfilling career, and how today he mentors and invests in leading entrepreneurs globally. Get ready to be inspired and enlightened by the stories of someone who has truly made a mark on the global stage. This is the Diego Piacentini podcast. Diego, welcome. I'm glad we've finally managed to make this happen, and in London.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, well listen, in the process of this conversation, we are hopefully going to cover some of the clear principles that you've developed over your career. So we'll try and avoid it being too chronological as we go along, and hope that we can map some of them to the various stages of your life so far. But starting out, as we always do, your purpose and where does it come from? Have you managed to articulate that?
I mean, purpose is something that is, I think, dynamic. It develops over time. You might have certain purpose when you are younger and you develop more experience and you, I would say, go deeper into the understanding what the purpose is. I think at this stage of my life, in the past, I would say probably 10 years, purpose has become how to give back in a useful way what you've learned and what you have gathered, collected. How can you be useful in that?
Okay, so if we do go back to when you first arrived into the US, aged 16 as a young student, and began this life of long-term learning, what were you like then?
I would say it's interesting, by the way. That's a very good question, because when I was 12, I had a relative who was 16 at that time who went to the US for 1 year with this program called AFS, American Field Service. And I still remember, I was 12, I heard about his experience. I said, when I'm his age, that's exactly what I want to do. I've always had developed that sense of curiosity, adventure. By the way, we're talking about, the mid 70s when going 1 year in the US from Italy was not a common thing, right? And in fact, when I was 16, I flew to the US. I ended up, getting the scholarship and spent 1 year in the US. It was the first time I put my, I flew, first time I flew. I never touched the seat of a plane before.
And what were you like then, as a young 16-year-old?
As I said, so the first definition was curious.
Yeah.
Always attracted by new experiences. I would say I was already developing the, might be a little bit bragging, but I was always attracted by the non-status quo. What's different out there? What is the new thing? I always felt that what I was doing was not enough. And I always have that, by the way. That's what my wife criticizes me a little bit. I'm always complaining that I don't know enough and I want to know more. So that was that sense that attracted me, what I want to learn. I mean, secondary to learning a new culture, spending time in a new place, secondary was also learning a new language, clearly, right? I had the intuition that knowing English would have been useful in my life. And how is that if not spending 1 year outside the US? So what is that sense of curiosity that really, really attracted me?
But you were slightly against the status quo. Was
Yes. What does that mean? Means that I was not accepting just living my, normal life. I always was attracted by doing different things. I was always looking for what's next.
Um, you often say that what happened next over your career was a large part luck, but you were subsequently hired by Steve Jobs to scale Apple Computers Europe. You were then tracked down by Bezos to join what became the S team to build Amazon globally. And then the Italian Prime Minister approached you to digitally transform Italy. Something else must have been going on. So is this sort of idea that you were lucky just a sort of self-deprecating affectation?
Well, I know that it might seems like a humble understatement that generates, a little comprehension for the others, but I think luck is an important component. It's obviously not the only thing, right? You can't just live out of luck your entire life, but it's a big component. And I still remember Jeff Bezos saying that when he was interviewing people, he was trying to understand whether the person had an awareness of how important or what role luck played in her or his career. Again, it's not just luck, but there is a component. I mean, I know a lot of people that are as good as me, better than me, smarter than me, that just didn't end up doing the same series of career choices.
But you had periods of where you sort of, you pushed through, you remained resilient because you did a long time at Apple and Amazon. It wasn't that you were sort of jumping from one to the next one.
No, because I always felt that, first of all, I was in the right companies. Although when I was at Apple, especially, I was there from 87 to late 99. Steve Jobs came back only the last 3 years. And at that time I was running Apple Europe. But before, Apple was really poorly run. You would have seen a company that was actually going down. But at the same time, it was a company that was not run by technology leader anymore. It was run by salespeople. And when a technology company is run by a non-technology person, you know what often ends of that. What's the end of that company? But I always found an opportunity to grow and learn within the company. I started doing financial services in Apple Italy, and I ended up being the responsible for running a lot of the activities at Apple Europe. And when Steve Jobs came back, it was that transformation moment that really, I saw that as a huge opportunity, not just for Apple, but also for my learning. It was incredible by just the events I was exposed to. And I always share that, I was there when the famous meetings, Macworld, where Bill Gates confirmed that he would have supported Microsoft product would have supported Apple Mac, which was a quintessential reason for Apple to still exist. Without the support of Microsoft, Apple would have gone down. So the capability of Steve to choose the few but very, very important things to do. And again, my sense of learning, understanding, adapting myself, or inventing myself. Again, luck, but I also admit I had those.
And you took a high risk as well, right? In leaving Apple in top job to take yourself and your family to Seattle.
Yes, but again, it's never one reason when you do that. There was a component of different reasons. I think it is important to go through them just to give an idea, because you make those choices. One reason was, at the end of the day, running Apple Europe was an Uber sales job, right? It was a commercial activity because all the decisions were taken in Cupertino. And I was, kind of feeling a little bit restricted in that role, although I was still enjoying it. I still had to learn a lot. At the same time, I was feeling that Europe was losing any technological lead. That was the time where there was still a computer industry in Europe. There was still a software industry in Europe. There was still a strong telecommunication industry in Europe, but things were just going down. And you could see that things were happening in the Silicon Valley, were happening in the US. And there was this new thing called the internet. Don't forget, at that time, when Jeff was explaining Amazon to the investors, most of the times he had to start by not saying what e-commerce was, but do you know what the internet is? Right? So there was, and I had, see, that's another component of luck. Not always you get the opportunity to join a new company at the very beginning of a new technological trend, right? It's AI now, was the internet at that time. Apple did understand the internet. In fact, Apple did at that time. You remember the iMac, the technological simplicity of having the internet built into the computer, which now is obvious, but at that time wasn't. But what I learned from Jeff was, in the conversation with Jeff, was the aha moment. Says, oh my God, this is going to be big. So technological, that's the second reason. The opportunity, and that's me communicating to Jeff that if he wanted to build an international business, that's the reason I was being recruited, interviewed. I learned from the mistakes of Apple, and I explained to him that I think that if you want to run a proper, large international business, whomever runs that business should be sitting with you, next to you, and not remotely in Europe or in Asia. So the opportunity to be part of the decision. And we go back to your initial question. When I was a kid, a 16-year-old, I spent 1 year 50 miles away from Seattle. It was like, wow.
50 miles.
It was Olympia, the capital of Washington. So just very close to Seattle. I would go to Seattle frequently. I was in love with Seattle. And this serendipity event that, 22 years later, I had been interviewed by a company that is in Seattle. Don't forget, when I was an exchange student, I went back to Europe. I would travel often to the US, but I never lived in the US. So those are four reasons. And then you add to that, obviously, the propensity to risk, your curiosity. My point was, I'm going to Amazon. Amazon was losing a lot of money at that time. Most of the people did not understand why Amazon was losing money. And I told myself, you go there, you try it. If it doesn't work, you do something else. Not many people have that. I don't know if you call it self-confidence, arrogance. I don't know how to define it, but you can reinvent yourself somewhere else.
And so with the founders of these great companies, you developed many principles that have endured. We can't cover all of them today. Out on the internet, there's a lot of recordings of your lectures at Stanford and TED Talks, etc., where you go into more depth on all of them, or most of them. But there's a few selected favorites that we have that we wanted to engage you on today. So the first one, you're often comfortable to make big decisions that would never have passed the scrutiny of a financial controller. Can you give us a few examples?
Sure. Just to make a point here, I would split the things we're going to be talking about. Some of them are leadership principles. Some of them are behavioral forms of behavior. This is more like a form of behavior. In this case, Jeff had a strong conviction of a few things, right? When everybody, for example, when everybody thought that eBay was the darling of the internet because they did not build warehouses to ship products, they were just a platform where they would make sure that demand and supply were satisfied. Jeff was very focused on the customer experience. In order to be satisfying the customer, you need to control the entire customer experience. At eBay, a seller, I'm talking about 2000, right? 1999, 1998, very early, would ship a product. Most of the time, eBay did not know whether the shipment was ending in their good way, what kind of support to give to the customer, controlling the full customer experience. So owning the inventory, shipping the products, making sure the product would arrive on time. If the customer would tell you, wait, the product was 3 days late, Amazon would say, fine, I'll give you the money back right away. I mean, Jeff believed in that very strongly. The financial markets hated that because they saw inventory risk. And actually, let's be clear. I still remember when I joined Amazon, the first financial activity that I saw was a huge write-off of, I think, $40 million of an excess inventory of toy business because Amazon had no technology to really choose which toys put in inventory. So I love that. I love that conviction that building customer experience, you need to take risk. And allow me to add the lack portion, which is, for example, when I joined, it was just 2 or 3 months before the full internet bubble
Meltdown.
melt down,
Yeah.
Amazon was able to close a 1.6 billion, I think, euro convertible bond just days before the whole bubble bursted. Would Amazon survive without that? Probably yes. Would my international business exist without that? Probably not. So, and that literally was, weeks before the whole market shut off.
So that meant that he did have balance sheet to be able to take risks on, but
Correct.
But then how do you consider what's a conviction weighted idea versus just an experiment?
That's the point. But that's what makes the difference between great leaders and
being
not
right.
so great leaders, which is, and this is a leadership principle, being right a lot.
Yeah.
He knew that, obviously he took a lot of risk in there, that building using all the tools to build that great customer experience, building warehouses, building forecasting systems, building inventory management systems, things that, were very rudimentary at that time, would have allowed Amazon to keep low prices because of cost reduction. So that was his long-term view. Did we have doubt at some point? Did I have doubts? Oh, absolutely, yes. It was very messy at the beginning, right? Lots of, mistakes. We were lucky that we had a very good balance sheet in terms of cash, but the cash was, quickly ending. At some point, when I joined, was get big fast. A few months later was, let's get profitable as soon as we can.
Okay.
So there's also this capability of,
sounds like 2022
moving the objective. But this is very important. That's also one of the things I learned, which is never change the vision. Be stubborn on the vision, but be very flexible on the way you execute that vision.
Because you highlighted recently the front page of Business Week in November 2006 when Wall Street wanted Bezos to stop his AWS efforts and just look after the store. Is that just another example of us, financial bods can't think differently and properly challenge the status quo?
I would say that's very good. That's a good one. AWS, and let me mention, for example, Prime.
Yeah.
This Prime subscription, which is now pretty much, I don't know how many households in the US. I think 2 out of 3 households in the US have a Prime subscription. Both businesses, going back to your question, all financials analysis, MPVs, whatever, were saying that those businesses would have been a disaster. Like the CFO at that time hated the decision of going and investing into Prime and going into investing into AWS. But Jeff had a strong belief, which is if we get customers happy with Prime, they will buy more. If they will buy more, our cost structure will go down. If our cost structure will go down, we will be able to reduce prices. By reducing prices, we become a very attractive platform, and we'll be able to attract more sellers or more vendors, and this is the flywheel. This is the being right a lot, right? Did he have data to support that? Although we are an incredibly data-driven company, he did not have data to support that. He had his strong hypothesis that's what have happened. And the same thing with AWS. And by the way, AWS, just to be clear, Prime, I was there, and Prime was definitely Jeff's idea. Jeff's and another guy called Greg Greeley, who invented a concept of free shipping first, and Jeff transformed that into Prime. And interestingly enough, when we wanted to build a loyalty program to make sure the customers were more addicted to Amazon, Jeff was always, and we were coming back with cliche marketing ideas, cashback ideas, loyalty programs, loyalty card, and all those kind of things that he goes, no, those are just easy to copy. Anybody can do that. What can we do that, thanks to our scale, our size, our customer centricity, nobody else can copy? And that's where came the free shipping idea. You buy a subscription, you get free shipping. At the very beginning, I think it was 2-day free shipping or 3-day free shipping. Now it's like a few hours free shipping, depending where you live. Same thing with AWS. And AWS was even a much more daring move. So I always was very supportive of Prime. I bought into it. I did not understand AWS. I did not understand the concept of cloud computing. It was like, really? Why are we doing this? We're a retailer. I was a pedestrian thinking. I was not thinking outside the box. I was not thinking big. Thinking big is another with the Amazon leadership principle. And we did exactly what McKinsey would tell you not to do. Focus on your core business. Don't get distracted, blah, blah, blah. And the same thing was Wall Street. And that's the Business Week cover that I share with you. But he was right. He was a big bet. I mean, think about the $2 trillion valuation of Amazon. I mean, without AWS, it wouldn't be $2 trillion. Let's be clear.
Okay, well, you've been very humble because you did push Prime in Japan and everything as well when other people told you not to. But we need to move on. Next one on the hit list is truth-seeking versus social cohesion. This is one of your principles, but is that outdated thinking in a world of the modern workforce where empathy and compassion is important? How do you respond to people who say that that approach goes too far and could be toxic to a culture?
I think that those are generalizations. You can be going after the truth. Sometimes it can be, rude. It can be annoying. It can be too much insisting. But at the end of the day, you can do that with empathy. You can do that by convincing people that's the right thing to do. And it's not necessarily a negative behavior to go after the truth, even though that could cost a lot of pain. Let me tell you how that started, because literally, I remember we used to have, I think they still have it, I don't know if they still have it, we used to have a book club where Jeff or others, we would choose a book, read the book, and then comment at the esteem level and see if it was something useful for us. There are some specific. And during one of those meetings, Jeff came with a concept, we must have read it somewhere, for which he explained one thing. He said, look at the ceiling here, and the ceiling is how much? How tall is the ceiling? You're going to say it's 4 meters. I'm going to say 3 meters 80. And most companies, in most social conglomerates, the answer is 390, which is the exact average between what you say and what I say. The right answer is, let's look for a ladder. Let's look for a tape. Let's get up the ladder. The right answer takes time. And the right answer is probably 4.01 or 3.97. Most companies compromise. We need to go after the truth, even if the truth is, and especially is, tiresome, sometimes boring and annoying, takes effort, but you have to do it because you need to be looking at the exact data to take those decisions. And that moment for me was like another of those, oh, haha. Because I think I was like that, but if you don't have mentors that shows you that way, you lose that.
Everyone tells us that they make data-driven decisions these days, and it was a big part of the philosophy at Amazon. But you've said a few times, when anecdotes and data don't match, usually anecdotes win. Is that right?
That is, yes, because again, data are very important to take decisions, but you need to have enough data and you need to have the right data. So sometimes in our experience, most times when your anecdotes, and I'll give you an example, don't match the data, it turns out that the data were wrong. So that doesn't mean the data are not important. The right data are important. So here is the anecdote. Very early 2000, we were presented by the person running customer service data around what is the percentage of time that we answer a phone call within 1 minute. That was our standard metrics. And the data would say a very high percentage. I don't remember. Let's call it 80%, which is still not great, but obviously it wasn't bad. And Jeff said, it's interesting. You tell me 80%, I see the data here, but I got a few friends that tell me that they call a customer service to stay on the phone for 10, 15, 20 minutes before getting a phone call, before getting an answer. Help me out. Am I unlucky? Are my friends unlucky? And we were in the meeting. You remember where there are those interphone for the conference calls?
Yeah.
Jeff goes, okay, let's do that. And, and he calls the customer centers at Amazon, sorry. 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute, you start seeing sweat.
Yeah.
2 minutes, 3 minutes. After 6 minutes, they hang the phone. You can imagine what's the rest happened, right?
Yeah.
And starting that moment, Jeff did an amazing thing, which is when he would receive, by the way, people knew his email address, jeff@amazon.com. And customers would write to him. He would literally go through his BlackBerry. Remember BlackBerry? Also during the S team, he had this capability of being in an S team meeting, checking his emails, which I would believe, at least for normal people, is highly distracting. And go through delete, boom. And then there is one email that it kind of attracted his attention. And he would forward that email to whomever in the S team would be responsible for that issue, CC the entire S team. And that S team member, me, if it was something about Japan, or Jeff Wilkie, if it was something about operations, would have to go and investigate for the root cause. Most of the times, obviously you develop that skills over time, 90% of the time that email would pretty much point out a defect within our processes. And that's where you learn root cause analysis, theory of constraints. And that's amazing how you learn from customers. How many CEOs you know of that take email directly from customers? I know it is definitely not scalable. He's not doing that anymore. But we learned that. My country managers of Germany and Japan and France were doing the same thing with their teams. So you propagate that kind of culture within the company.
Which is probably a good lead to our final one of the principles here, which is, and unfortunately I've heard this a few times from you, which is good intentions don't work. That sounds a bit much. People are trying their best. Should you not give them a break?
People oftentimes are well-intentioned. I mean, most of the people you work with, they are honest. Most of the people you work with, they are hard workers. Most of the people you work with want to achieve results. But most of the time, if you don't have an organization and a culture that are driven by data, driven by mechanisms, driven by technology, in that case, they say, okay, oh yeah, I understand what the problem is. I'll fix it.
But they don't close the loop.
And then no closed loop mechanism. You would go in meetings, you would say, hey, Joe, why don't you fix that? Oh yeah, I'll fix that. And then nothing happens. How many companies you experience that? A lot of the times. So that's why every time that we had an issue, we had to explain exactly how that issue would have been fixed, not just, we'll fix it.
And is this a bigger thing? Good intentions don't work. Does that sort of lead to purpose, even of some larger organizations that have got good intentions, but maybe the strategy doesn't line up with something that they can ultimately fulfill?
I think that's a very good description of where most of the times the issues are. You have goals that sometimes are noble, sometimes are very important, but you don't have a concrete way to deliver it. You don't have an organization. You don't have a set of tools. You don't have a specific set of activities that would allow to reach that. I still remember, for example, that when Amazon would start a new business, one of the mechanisms, we would focus from the very beginning. Mechanism number one, do you have the right people to build that or to build and reach that objective? One of the most frequent questions we would get, and I would ask my team, is, who is the highest in terms of most senior person who's single-threaded responsible for that. Now, you would say, yeah, but not everybody can afford to have those type of organization. That is absolutely true. But it's also true that you want to build something big from scratch. You need to be organized to do it. So that would be the mechanism to it.
So, whilst we're on people, you've hired a lot of people over your career, and you get asked a lot to evaluate new senior hires. What have you learned about finding the right people?
I would say that there are some obvious things and some less obvious things. And the obvious things is that learned very, very quickly that senior leaders that I've switched in many, many companies, every 1.5 years, a new company, they usually are more mercenaries than missionaries. And I'm using these terms intentionally because in any case, one of the reasons why I stayed so long at Apple and Amazon, because I saw the mission of being there. I was driven by that mission. Mercenaries in the Silicon Valley is full of mercenaries, are people that are just attracted by the next career level, by the amount of money they make. So one is to find the people that really believe in what you're doing, people that fit with the culture. The other thing that we've learned, and I have learned specifically, is the level of experience not necessarily means that the person is right for the job. It's incredible how especially if you are in a company like Amazon or others, where you are a disruptor, we're hiring, for example, a lot of people from the physical retail business, right? People that had experience to, buy inventory, to sell products, to choose inventory, and because we didn't know anything about that. And most of the times I would ask the question is, what are you known for at your company? And when the answers that I often got was, oh, I am the person that most of the teams go to because I help them to determine which organization to work. That answer was absolutely useless for us, right? I mean, lots of big leaders in big companies, they become pretty much a solver of internal issues, which is not replicable. And you would not believe how many actually are in that way. So that's one of the other things that we learned. The other thing is less obvious is there are many roles where being a generic business leader is really, really hard. People that need to have general management skills, sales skills, motivational skills, country leaders, for example, right? And I do remember when we launched Amazon in India, was to find the right country leader. And I ended up choosing a person with very little business experience. But he was a very passionate Indian national, had been working in Seattle for many, many years. So he knew the Amazon culture, who was a technology leader. Because the hypothesis, which actually did work, was that it's much easier to teach business skill to a strong technology leader than the other way around, when you know that the main bottlenecks to launch a country in that specific case was A, knowing the culture, and B, understanding what type of technology was needed for the Indian markets to build the features that were needed for the Indian markets. So invent the role by not going after the typical skills, but teaching the skills to people that had a great asset, which in that case was technology and leading technology teams.
What do you look back on as being the most either purposeful or meaningful achievement during that time?
I would start with the most meaningful lessons, which is separate. It goes back a little bit with the truth-seeking conversation we had, is separate emotions from the hard facts. Uh, one of my most um, meaningful experiences at Amazon was a very negative experience when Jeff pretty much told me in front of my team that there was a time of frustration. Amazon was not doing too well. We're talking about the first 3 or 4 years of 2000. He was expecting a much bolder plan for me. And he pretty much told me that what I presented was pedestrian, which is not a good thing to hear from your boss in front of your team. And I took it really personally. And I thought, geez, it's time for me to move on and do something else. And went home and talked to my wife and talked about that episode. And she asked me, well, so what was the reason for that? And I thought about it, and I started looking back at the situation and said, he was right. He might have said it in a different way, but he was absolutely right. And that was a very important moment for me. The day after I went back, I was very motivated, also because my team was, they saw the situation, they saw how embarrassing it was. Thanks God we had a great relation with my team, so they were very supportive. And I started reinventing myself. And that was a very, very important moment. It's the separation of emotions from hard facts. And one way or the other, that's very hard. I see a lot of social cohesion in many companies. Oh my gosh, my experience in government was just all about that. People that put their personality ahead of facts. And I decided he was right. Let's move on and let's focus on fixing those problems. And my main issue at that time was, by the way, funny enough, within some of those team members that were very sympathetic to me, which were not they did not have the right skills I would have needed to build what Jeff had as a vision in mind. So I had to really, and that's where I started spending a good 50% of my time on hiring big talents, which I literally went after. And some of them are now reporting directly to Emily Jassy at Amazon. And that was the turning point. I was not recruiting big enough. I was being too frugal. I was being too, I wasn't just not bold enough.
So it's probably fair to say that you can easily get frustrated, but thankfully you've got the patience to sort these things out. What was the purpose behind you going into the government and the Italian one of all spaghetti disasters?
Well, how did this happen? At that time, there was a prime minister whose name is Matteo Renzi, who had a very high consensus, and he seemed to be a very different politician than what Italy's been used to. One of his actions was to visit, for example, the Silicon Valley and meet Italian entrepreneurs. I received a phone call from the consul of San Francisco. Hey, Renzi is going to be here. He would like to meet with you. He heard about you, and he'd like to get to know you. Flew down to San Francisco. I had breakfast with Matteo Renzi, and he said, listen, I have this plan of digitizing. Well, he had this very abstract plan of digitizing Italy, whatever that means. And would you be interested in helping me out? And first of all, I was very pleased with that proposal. I said, yeah, I'm not ready. I'm enjoying Amazon. And it's so hard. I don't really understand what you're asking for. And so the conversation ended there. A few months later, he gets back to me again. But in the meanwhile, I kept thinking, why do I want to belong to the people that keep saying that in Italy nothing works and have no role in fixing a few things? Because it's so much easier to stay outside and criticize everything, right?
Understood.
Or do you want to be part of, trying to understand what the problem is? Because you can I'm going to be part of the solution because you don't really understand what the problem is. But do you understand what the problem is and help out? So I spoke to Jeff, I spoke to Monica, my wife, and Jeff told me one very interesting thing, which is, I think you should apply the regret minimization approach, which is, would you regret not to try to help out your country, or would you regret leaving Amazon? And that approach gave me it was like seconds. I said, oh, sure. I would regret not even trying. And Jeff said, they're going to make it easier for you. I'm going to give you a 2 years leave of absence so that you have 2 years to try it, which was great. And I went back to Renzi. I defined in more specific details what this abstraction of digitizing Italy meant. And I accepted I created some conditions and I accepted the job, and I suspended my activity for Amazon for 2 years. I went to Rome. Family stayed in Seattle for obvious reasons. And I started recruiting a team of 40 people, and we started building digital platforms for government. So digitizing Italy became, and then applying all the principles that I learned at Amazon became something more complete. There was the definition of 4 pillars of digitization.
Because it was a highly successful project, but it was also high risk, moving from a fast-moving US organization to working in government. So how did you manage to set the parameters to allow you to be able to do what you did?
I knew what I was getting into. I mean, funny things is that, did you know you were getting easily frustrated and everything? I said, yeah, I mean, I knew what I was getting into. I can't go to work for government and then say nothing works here, because you know that before. Okay. So I get into that mode.
Yeah.
Don't complain. You know you're going to go for government. You're going to work for the Italian government, which is another complexifier on top of government. And I created some of the conditions that would make my work slightly easier. And so you need to identify what those conditions are. I mean, I went into Rome in August, knowing that nobody works at Rome in August, so that I could sit down, analyze, learn, study, look at what the problem is. And I even, helped to write my appointment decree. Because originally I should have been like vice minister of development, economic development. But it turned out that being commissioner would have given me more powers of getting things done, including hiring people. So that alone, the decision of being a commissioner and being appointed as such, working directly for the prime minister, was condition number 1. And then I could hire people. And then I spent my time hiring 40 people. It took me about 2 months, and they found people like me, the Italians that worked at Google, worked at Microsoft, had their own startup, that when they saw my mission, they said, well, we're going to help them out.
But you did manage to articulate your mission in quite an intelligent way.
Yeah, I wrote the Medium article. At that time, Medium was not well known, but I knew that the people I wanted were on Medium.
Okay.
In fact, it did work.
Yeah.
And we received 3,000 applications. Literally, I spent the first 40 days not going to conferences, not going to meetings, because once you have a role like that, the first thing you do, at least in Italy, you receive invitation to 1,000 conferences that are completely useless. It's a country based on conferences, which are not very useful. So you ignore all of them and you focus on this. And then we started defining what are the things that do exist but don't work. So don't reinvent the wheel. Don't go there telling, oh, you civil servant, you don't understand anything. I'm coming from the private world. I know how to fix that. That is A, wrong, and B, you're not going to get a lot of support if you do that. So we decided to go, this tool does exist, but it's not really working. Talking about digital identity. The digital payment platform does exist, but it's not really working. But those were vital things to build what we ended up building, which was a citizen app for payments and other things. And it did work. But again, we took this down from a level of abstraction, the political abstraction, to a level of concrete building of tools. Now, I did this very small thing, right? It's not like what I did changed the...
But it was used your...
But it did help, right? And then there is another lucky part, right? I mean, COVID came, and what we built, which was, Italians had a very hard time to use digital tools. And the idea was, well, let's make sure that on the digital tools we built, we incorporate the green pass. Remember that it was the time that you need to show that you're vaccinated to go into things. The moment that was one of the most effective ways to show the green pass, we ended up having 32 million downloads. of that application.
Wow.
So jump into the occasion and see what works, right? And I was very happy. I mean, I'm so not regretting at all that decision. It was a great learning experience. I would honestly recommend people because that's at the end of your career. If you're looking what else you can do obviously nonprofit and anything, but helping on something concrete, your country is, I think, in government, I think is a very, very useful experience. And I insist on the something concrete, because oftentimes people end up being the advisor of this minister and advising is not really helpful.
Okay, so we now fast forward to the last few years. You've transformed into an investor. You're a board member on some super exciting companies that you've thoughtfully chosen. You're a mentor to founders globally. You advocate for entrepreneurship in Italy, and you run your own family office. How transferable were those skills, decision-making processes as you moved from an operator to an investor?
Very useful for giving me an approach. Whether they're going to be useful to calculate in terms of return investment, I don't know. We'll know a few years down the road. The investor side helps me to, and also thanks to your support and the support of your team, to look at the companies by using some Amazon approach, right? So for example, now we're investing in some companies that are AI based. People try to give some method and finding the data to support that decision. But we're such an early stage of the industry that, finding the right data to support the decision sometimes not only is hard, but it's also misleading. So that's at that point you focus more on what is the problem the company is trying to solve and the quality of the team, right? Still, problem could be a great problem to solve. Their ideas could be a great idea. The team could be a great team, not necessarily turn out to be a successful business, right?
Yeah.
But that's the nature of venture capital. On some of the investments, I'm also helping with mentorship activities, the CEO, which gets me closer to that idea. As you well know, some of the companies invested in already went bust. A few were average successful, a couple very successful. But again, that's the nature of the business we do. In terms of activities of board, I am on 4 boards, and I chose those 4 with some criteria. One is The Economist, and my criteria was it's a business that needs transformation. First of all, it's a great brand. The world desperately needs independent, high-quality journalism in a historical period where partisanship wins. It needs to be transformed, right? And transforming a legacy, well, no, it's not easy. But I found the right combination of the 3 things, and it's turning out that The Economist has done a huge amount, not because of me, but it was part of the solution. Very recently, I joined the board of DoorDash, which is a public company in the Silicon Valley, in San Francisco. And the main reason was I was hungry to go back to an Amazon-like environment. I was hungry to go back to a complicated business, a low-margin business, a complex system, a set of very intelligent people. I was missing that, right? So because The Economist is relatively small, lots of smart people, but it's a small company, it's a small business. The other 2 that I'm going to mention in a moment are startups. I wanted to complete that. Is DoorDash a mission-driven business, delivering food? Yeah, probably not. But it does offer a lot of the complexity that I love to be part of. The other 2 are more mission-driven. One is called Apolitical, which is a startup from 2017 that belongs a little bit to my experience, which is reskilling and retraining at scale of civil servants to the issues that are part of the modern world. So it's an education company for civil servants. Fantastic problem to solve. And the other is a micromobility company. It's called Voi. It's a Swedish company, operates all over Europe. and it's about urban mobility for the time being, focused on bike sharing, scooter sharing. Over time might be evolving into something more. But again, low margin. I love the low margin business for some reason because they are hard. And if you solve the problems relatively to low margin business, then the other problems look easier.
What are your long-term goals as an investor? And is trying to match your purpose to that, in Amazon speak, a complexifier?
Obviously you might say return on investment, right? But that's kind of obvious. I would keep that apart. To me, it's try to combine how to make the money work. And I know you are going to be smiling when I'm going to say that, but to how to make it work the proceeds of the Amazon lottery that I won, and try to combine that with some purpose activities. That's why the investments in climate change, like carbon capture, micromobility, all those things that we've seen, but not only, right? Love what artificial intelligence can do. So pick the funds and the companies that could be having a role in that. It's a lot of the curiosity, the complexity, the putting at work what I can, because all those companies need one thing, right? Growth. How to manage complexity to grow. And that's what I've seen both at Apple and Amazon. So I can help, just hiring people. It's a skills that not many companies have. So I just putting the combination of putting my experience at work with the purpose of the company. Now, not all those companies have a specific noble purpose. We're trying to put some methodologies around the choices.
How have you managed to balance professional aspirations with personal life and make time for those that you care about?
This is so-called life quality balance.
Yeah.
First of all, I think that balance is subjective. My balance can be different than your balance can be different than someone else's balance, right? Some people their balance is, I'd like to work 12 hours. Some people say, I'd like to work 6 hours. At the end of the day, it's what we produce that matters, right? But it's not like necessarily who works 12 hours have a bad life quality balance. But keeping that principle in mind, so that everybody has a different, in my opinion at least, has a different definition of what that is. I've probably not been great at that. So I'm not a great teacher. I was lucky to, and I'm lucky to have a very supportive spouse who helped me with making the right decision. It sounds trivial, but if you spend a lot of time on work, the time that you spend at home with your kids, with your spouse, with your friends, should be high quality. Should be really a moment of learning, a moment of teaching.
And being present.
And it's interesting that I see that my kids, and probably about your kids, is that they try to spend more spare time than I did. And I think that's fantastic. I don't criticize that because I was working more, right? Because I think that, life is evolving and quality of life is being defined in a different way. And as long as you live with that purpose that we have generically spoken about before, and you put a lot of attention to what you do, either work or outside of work, I think it's fine. Now, go back to life. We are lucky enough, and my kids are lucky, that obviously work is not just an essential way to eat, which still a lot of people eat, pay your rent, pay your utilities, right? They don't have to work for that. By the same time, they have to work. It's like, that's one of the principles that we stated within the family. You have no right to the wealth we have unless you demonstrate that you're working for it, whatever that work is. It's there is no money going to you simply because we have it. And then you can put all the rules or the principles you want, right? I'm not teaching anything here, not at all. But there must be that purpose that around the fact that you need to make sure that what you do is building something, is doing something that is either done, has to be work at the end of the day. That's the definition of work.
What advice would you give to a young Diego?
Follow your instinct is one of the advices that I would give myself. I think I was too, especially the very beginning, my first years of work, I was more afraid of not expressing my opinion. When something's looked obviously wrong to me, I always think, oh, the guy has been doing that for a long time. He knows more than I do. And it turned out that something that looked stupid actually was stupid. So that's definitely one of the things that I'm generically speaking to, people that are exposed to many situations. It's like, don't believe that experienced people, experts, are real experts. There is too much around the value of the expertise and experience that sometimes take you to do the wrong thing.
What a great note to finish it on. We've covered a lot in the discussion. Thank you for sharing your time, wisdom, humor, and thank you for all you do for others.
By the way, wisdom. Nobody in my family believes I'm wise, believe me.
Wow, there's a lot of wisdom that you share with us, and you help us to be better at what we do. So thank you for that, and for the pursuit of your purpose that you bring to the companies that you work with today.
Thank you.
All content on High Net Purpose is provided as general information only. It does not constitute any advice, recommendation, or representations, and is not intended to influence listeners or users into making any specific investments or any other decisions. Please be aware that guests and presenters on High Net Purpose may have investments in any of the topics or products being discussed. Their reviews and opinions are their own and should not be taken as endorsements or financial advice. Before making financial decisions, we strongly recommend seeking advice from a qualified financial professional. This podcast may not be copied, reproduced, further distributed, or published in whole or part.